The only check on the president's power is Congress, and that would be through impeachment. That's it.
Mondays with Mike.
Mondays with Mike. Mondays with Mike.
So, in legal arguments here recently, attorneys for the Trump administration, when questioned in court about whether he could tear down the Statue of Liberty, because he tore down the east wing of the White House, so there's the parallel, they didn't say it would be permitted. Here's my understanding of it. They didn't explicitly say, yeah, he could go ahead and do that, but what they said was, who would have standing in the time in which he did that to stop him? That is how I understood. And standing being, you're someone who can initiate a lawsuit. That is my understanding of the Trump administration's lawyers' argument. Is that your understanding of it?
Yeah, the general idea of what I understand was being said is that Trump probably could do it. The only ones that could stop Trump are Congress, and only through impeachment. That effectively the only check on the president's power is Congress, and that would be through impeachment. That's it, right? That's the only real impediment to stopping something like that in the country is Congress, because Congress can decide what high crimes and misdemeanors are, and because it's up to Congress to define what those actually are. Like, there's a few, but there's no stated definitive list of what a high crime or misdemeanor is. And so that's where it's really left up to Congress to, one, file the articles of impeachment, and two, prosecute the articles of impeachment, right? One, you have to pass them, and then two, you have to do the trial. And that's it. That's essentially the argument.
That was their argument. So, I guess the first round of questions is, number one, could he, meaning is this true? Was their argument true?
Essentially, it seems true-ish, right? That the president could just decide to remove a monument or move it. He was able to do it for the... I guess the only issue there would be if New York has any claims over any of the land around the Statue of Liberty, right? I guess there may be some ambiguity as to whether the Trump administration will be able to move it anywhere outside of the limited land that it's located on for the Statue of Liberty without New York State's express permission, right? Meaning that I guess technically they could lift it out if the federal government owns the airspace, but it's not so clear from my perspective if they could move it over, for instance, the water or anywhere within New York State without a New York State's express permission, because there is federalism. There's a separation between the state powers and the federal government. It might not be 100% true, right? In the sense that he could say move it, but he might need Congress's permission to appropriate money to move it. So Trump could theoretically say, I want it moved, but then he would have to ask Congress for money to move it, if that makes any sense. Because Congress is the one that appropriates money for the maintenance of it and for the national park system as a whole. But we've seen from the Trump administration, they've tried to move stuff, right? They've tried to move monuments. They tried to remove stuff. They tried to do the thing in Philadelphia. We saw there in Philadelphia that the judge said, no, you can't just erase history. So this is one of those things where, again, it's a kind of like gray area. It's a murky thing where I guess technically he has the power to say move it, and for at least a limited time, I'm sure that he could move it, but it's just then becomes a question of whether it would hold, right? Meaning that he probably has the power to do that, to issue that kind of command. It's just a question of how durable that is, meaning that could Congress, for instance, pass a law that says move it back, and then he vetoes it and they override that veto, right? That could happen. Or they could pass a constitutional amendment that says the president shall not be able to move the Statue of Liberty from where it is.
Yeah.
And then at that point, no, I don't think he could move it. right? If there was an express constitutional amendment that said the president does not have the power to move this thing or that thing or this other thing without XYZ, right? Because in the absence of that, he technically has full control of the executive branch, and it's the executive branch that oversees the national parks, right? It's either the Department of the Interior or it's I don't think it's the Department of Agriculture. I think it's there's one of them is the one that oversees the national park system, oversees the Forest Service, all those. But it's that one, right?
It wouldn't be the Department of Agriculture, so between those two, it would be Interior, right?
Probably, but it's whichever one oversees the national monuments
Mm-hmm.
and that oversees the maintenance of those monuments. Technically, Trump can fire everybody if they don't listen to what he has to say within the bounds of the law. And unless there's a law that explicitly says he cannot do that, he can at least
Mm-hmm.
try, right? I don't see why he can't try. Would it
Mm-hmm.
be a political nightmare? Yeah. Imagine if he tried to move Rushmore. If he's just one day woke up, he's, you know what? Let's move all of Mount Rushmore somewhere else.
Yeah.
Or he could put his own face on Rushmore, right? If he wanted to, he could say, "You got to put my face on it." He could try.
Oh God.
So this strikes me as comic book villain stuff. Strikes me as the symbolism here, and I know symbolism isn't facts. Liberty, like the statue stands for liberty, but Trump, his lawyers at least, assert his privilege to displace it. This to me, what do you think about it? Even if he could do it, should he be able to do it? And could anything be done at this point?
What I think about it is that
Yeah.
Congress has the ability to amend the Constitution way more than it has, right? That there's a lot more amendments that could be put into the Constitution to spell things out much more explicitly as to these are the powers the president has, these are the powers he does not have, right? And spell it in black and white, unequivocally, right? I think that in some respects, Congress has been very lazy over the years in respect to the amount of power they have and how little they use it, right? And that in this Congress in particular, if you look at the number, just by the numbers, it's one of the least productive Congress sessions ever, right? That they have passed barely any legislation. They haven't even been in session for huge amounts of days. Do you remember those during the Epstein file saga where they just weren't in session for 3 months? Where they didn't want to
Mm-hmm.
see that they wouldn't even show up. They were in recess because they didn't want to. Johnson didn't want to swear in the representative from Arizona, Grijalva, didn't want to swear her in, right? Because she was the deciding vote for the discharge petition, the Epstein files. So what did they do? They just didn't show up for months, right? They didn't do their job. It's okay. Congress has an awful lot of power that they just don't use. And that's what I think about this is that there's a whole list of things in our society that sort of function as like the national symbols of freedom and liberty and America as a whole. So I'm thinking the Lincoln Memorial, right? Or the Washington Monument, or the Lincoln Memorial, or Statue of Liberty. These sort of national icons. I think there has to be a more permanent effort to enshrine those in our national pantheon of
Yeah.
symbols so that the president can't just decide one day to wave his hands and go, you know what, I'm going to remake the Lincoln Memorial, or I'm going to slap my name on the Kennedy Senator Memorial, or I'm going to paint
Uh-huh.
the pool of the National Mall, or I'm going to build a giant arch, or build a giant ballroom, or build like all these things where Congress has a lot more power, especially in regards to the Constitution and amending it, that they just don't use, right? And the whole
Yeah.
point, if you read the founders of why they made the Constitution and the way they did it, and why they formed the government and the way they did, is that the people were supposed to be constantly fixing around the edges, right? That they were supposed to be constantly making amendments and making changes and repairing it and fixing it and evolving it because it's a living God. It's not meant to be static. It's a living,
Mm-hmm.
growing thing that constantly changes and morphs and evolves, right? That we're not fixed in 1776 or whatever. We're not fixed 250 years ago, right? That we're constantly changing and morphing and evolving. And in this respect, I think Congress just needs to get their act together and actually do their job.
Yeah, no, a lot of the reason which we could attribute to their inaction is because we had been talking previously about social media encouraging people to do nutty things, and you were talking about spectacle. And a lot of the people there in Congress know about the current power of spectacle as compared to the previous power of here's my resume, here are the offices I held prior, here's what I did in those offices. Nowadays, it's who has the snappy tweets, who can own the libs or whatever the equivalent is in reverse, who can really stick it to them. And I don't know, I don't think sticking it to them is particularly a national virtue. Getting the job done would be, and protecting the monuments would be, because they're important. They're important. The Sagrada Familia Church, that's important to Catholics, and Statue of Liberty sure as hell should be important to Americans. And I know Trump does a lot in order to stick you in the eye, and it's tempting to sometimes just shake your head and be like, no, that's designed to get my goat. But this should get our goat, in my judgment. The last word on this?
Yeah, so these are things that are owned by the American people, right? The presidency is a temporary position. And changing monuments in this way and building massive edifices and putting your face on money and your face on coins, that's closer to what dictators do than the embodiment of the people, right? And if America is anything, it's the consent of the governed, and it's an expression of the democratic will. And I don't know, right? I think that voters need to be much more outspoken in terms of getting their Congress people to actually do their jobs. That Congress has been able to passively move through these political cycles without really having to show up and really work every day to improve American society. If you look at how much they actually work in any given year, it's not that many days. Most people work 9 to 5 jobs, 365 days, not 365, but very few holidays in the US, very little paid time off for a lot of people. Somehow, they manage to show up to work every day and do 40-hour weeks, many weeks of the year. Congress doesn't do that. Congress takes really long vacations. And the question I always have is why are they paid so much money when they do so little work, right? That there's so much sitting around not doing anything, really. And they should do more. So that's my
Yeah.
last word on that, is that there's always more progress to be made. There's always more change, better ways to do things. And in some respects, Congress has stagnated in their role of shaping the democracy for the better, for the general welfare and the common good. That they've
Yeah.
ceded so much of their power. That's the word. Yeah, that's the word. They've ceded so much of their power to the executive to just run the show when Congress is supposed to be a co-equal branch of government. They're supposed to be actively, especially with regards to the money, they're supposed to be actively making sure that everything's on the up and up, that the money is being spent in a wise and effective manner. And clearly there's more work to be done, right? Especially for oversight when talking about things like, from one of our earlier topics, for Medicare Advantage, when talking about the overbilling and oversight for fraud. That's something Congress would be doing, is that they'd be spending much more money or hiring more regulators and passing laws to make sure that there's full compliance for these things, right? They pass the laws
Mhm.
to make these things happen, right? They passed a law to make Medicare Advantage a thing, but they clearly didn't put in enough enforcement mechanisms for regulation, right? Why would these
Right.
companies able to get away with it at all, right? How did they do that? And you just apply that to literally everything that exists that Congress passed a law to make happen. And it always comes down to there just wasn't enough money appropriated to enforcing. That you pass a thing, but you don't actually make sure the thing's done right or done well or done at all.
Yeah, let's remember that the Statue of Liberty stands for liberty, and long may she stand. Cool. You want to move on to NBA? This one will be pretty brief.
Sure. Yeah. There's not much to say about it other than actually I did write some stuff down.
Yeah. So the story here is that there was violence after one of the NBA games. I think it was the one that Trump went to, which would have been game 3, in New York. Some guy had a Spurs jersey on, the San Antonio Spurs playing the New York Knickerbockers in the NBA Finals. And the guy with the Spurs shirt, got attacked by people who evidently didn't like him. All this was caught on camera, but the crazy thing is it was caught on camera potentially by the commissioners of the violence. It was not good. It was not good. So, in the following game, 6 blocks of New York got locked down in a similar way to when Trump was visiting. A pretty simple question here. Is social media encouraging people to act foolishly? In this case, the foolish action would be the violent action. And can sports fandom go too far? I wonder.
Yeah, so the answer to both those questions is yes. I'll start with the social media. So social media does, I think, cause some people to act foolishly. And it's not just in regards to the sports stuff, it's also for things like pranks. The thing I'm thinking of right now is those people trying to run through the Scientology headquarters by sprinting through and filming it all.
Speed runs, yeah.
Trespassing on private property in the United States, bad idea because people can protect their property if someone's trespassing. In terms of the sports acting foolishly, it was foolish to film the fighting, it was foolish to do the fighting, right? But what I think social media does is that it amplifies events so that people. This was similar to when Congress moved from non televised hearings to televised hearings. Suddenly you had a lot more theatrics, you had a lot more showboating and all these like silly statements and clips and all the posters and the videos and all the stuff. They're putting on a show. And so when you add an incentive for money through social media, that people get followers, they get ad revenue, they get fame and notoriety, that I think creates an element where people will act in some cases more foolishly, especially for younger people because they don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex. And so their ability to assess risk and consequence isn't fully there. So they may not fully understand the risks that they're taking or the consequences of their actions and how significant those consequences may be. And so, in that respect, I think, yes, social media does, in some cases, encourage people to act foolishly because there are incentives within social media for them to make money from acting foolishly. The one other example I'm thinking is the guy who had that truck or car in Seattle where he'd race around the city at very high speeds, making really loud noises with his car, and it kept resulting in noise complaints, and he got fined, and it was just a whole thing. And he was doing it because he had a social media following of people going, you're making so much noise and racing around the city streets late at night.
Yeah, the Belltown Bandit, among one of the most insidious of crimes, proportional to how much you get fined.
Because he was keeping people up, right? Early in the morning and late at night. It's like, almost definitely he was doing it because he had a social media following, and he was making money, and he had fame and notoriety. And some people pursue that. They pursue the celebrity of that. For your other question, though, has sports fandom gone too far in the past? Absolutely. So there's a term called crush, where when stadiums get to capacity, essentially the fans move too tightly into a stadium and they crush people under their feet. People die. And so there's a couple of notorious cases of something called the Hillsborough disaster in Sheffield, England during a soccer match. A lot of people died, right? When there were too many fans in a stadium that couldn't hold as many people. And in Indonesia, at the Kanjuruhan Stadium disaster, over 100 people died. It was very bad. And then the National Stadium disaster in Lima, Peru in 1964, a similar thing happened where the fans tried to, I don't know if they tried to storm the field, but there were way too many fans to a soccer match. And a lot of people got crushed. And the point here, it's called crush because people get crushed underfoot, right? That there's a stampede of sorts and people die. But the other issue is there have been fires in the past where you can't get out because but that doesn't just happen for sporting events. There was a concert of was he a rapper? There was like a concert where the fans of the musician essentially they stormed the the concert venue trying to get closer to him. And a bunch of people, if I remember correctly, they died because they're trying to film him with their phone. And it was just bad. The whole situation there was bad. But in terms of sports fandom going way too far, absolutely. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand the idea of, I get it that sports can be viewed like a religion for some people, that it gives them the sense of community and the sense of meaning in their lives, that they gravitate towards sports to find purpose. I personally don't understand it, right? But it's not me, right? That some people, they gravitate towards these sort of communal things. So religion,
You're a sports atheist.
celebrities. I think about the bread and circuses, right? I think about the gladiator matches and the Ben-Hur and the chariot races, that kind of thing. Like I think of, why are hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars spent on these sports stadiums and arenas while everything around it falls into decay, right? Like, why do we have these edifices in developed worlds? All of it's the politics of distraction, right? As things get worse, the political elements of society look to create these sort of, I'm trying to think of the word. No, there's a term, the opiate of the masses. It accomplishes two very unique things. You create an air of celebrity, right? You create fame for these athletes. And so you just talk constantly about the celebrities and the paparazzis and the relationships and the blah, 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 and the money, blah, 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 all those people that you elevate on a pedestal. And then it creates the element of distraction. What ultimately is just people playing with a ball on a field, or they're kicking a ball with their feet, or they're throwing a ball with their arms, or they're hitting a ball with a stick, or they're carrying a ball in their hands while others try to tackle them, either through wearing armor or not wearing armor, right? And it's some variation on that. There are, of course, other sports, but the big ones, the ones with the stadiums, are some variation of war games, of some kind of wargaming thing. In some respects, they function also as a cathedral for nationalistic pride, right? So think about the national anthem and the saluting the flag, and you have the flyovers and the spectacle. And there's I don't know if you've ever heard of Slavoj Žižek. He's a philosopher, Slovenian philosopher. Yeah, he's got a notion of something called the desert of the real, that we need the spectacle because the real things that we have are fading in some ways. So there was a time.
I just watched The Matrix this week, in fact.
Sure.
Desert of the Real.
You take the blue pill or you take the red pill? Are you Cypher, right? You know the steak's not real, but darn does it taste like steak, right? Do you want to be him, or do you want to be Neo? Do you want to be a human battery that knows it's a battery, or do you want to live in the dream? The whole thing about modern society right now that makes it super complicated as we get more and more attached to digital technology, and as we move towards AI being our overlords, is that there is a future where they create something more like Ready Player One, where you're trapped in a digital world while the world around you fades away, right? As climate change makes parts of the world increasingly unlivable. Look, the game that they're playing for the wealthiest of the world is to come up with ways to distract people from the fact that their wealth is derived from extracting huge amounts of value from people's lives that people are willingly giving to them, right? It's not that they're necessarily taking it from them, although in some cases they are through wars and territory conquest and all that kind of stuff. It's figuring out ways to extract wealth and resources from people in such a way that people think that they're giving it of their own volition, that they want to give it to them. Politics is a very similar concept, that you take in the tax monies and then a much smaller class decides where to appropriate that money. And that money is not necessarily always appropriated towards the general welfare of the people. That sometimes it's money that gets pocketed directly into the pockets of the friends and benefactors of the political elites, right? And the game is figuring out a way to get away with that without the game coming to an end, of the people pretty much voting everybody out of power and just using the resources themselves alone, right? Like extreme voting people out of power. A version of that would be banning all stock trading from members of Congress and the executive branch. Nobody gets to participate in the stock market. Nobody gets to participate in those betting markets, right? Because there's too many incentives on the part of the people in power to just manipulate the system, to just keep pressing the money button, right? You say a thing, money. You say another thing, money. You do a thing, money, right? And you just keep pressing the money button. Oh, free money today.
Yeah.
And so the extreme version of that is to vote everybody out right now and then only elect people who will explicitly be 100% public with everything, their taxes, any of their holdings, anything they own, right? That there is no element of that kind of corruption. We don't have that. We have a system that perpetuates wealth and perpetuates wealth inequality and then protects the property and assets of those people at the expense of the non-wealthy, right? So probably the most relevant example here is the Epstein class. The sort of, if you look at what's the ongoing saga of the Epstein files, why have other countries in the world prosecuted people, especially ones related to financial crimes, yet the United States somehow just can't? What's going on? Why is that the case? Why are we here? Anyways, that's a whole long discussion that's separate. In terms of the sports fandom going too far, the example I'm thinking of is the crush for stadiums. And then it's also, do you remember those riots in Canada when the hockey game was won from like the Stanley Cup or something? And the winning team city were like flipping cars and setting things on fire. It's like, what?
Most uncharacteristic of Canadians.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I saw that. I was like, what is going on? It's that even when they win, it can get too exuberant, right? Cars get flipped, things get set on fire, the fireworks get set off. It's just it's okay.
Settle down, eh?
Just be happy. Cheer that you won, but don't break down into anarchy.
Yeah.
So, yes, in response to your question, can sports fandom go too far? Absolutely. Of course it can.
Sports can present a big problem in that regard. Okay, let's do Sagrada Familia very briefly. There's this cathedral under construction in Barcelona, and it's been under construction since the 1800s, and it's going to be done in 2034, and there's enough of it finished that they can hold a mass there, and the Pope did a blessing. I say great, I say it's good architecture, and that it's good to have alms for the poor. So you might say, oh, the money could have been given to the poor, but I think great architecture in particular, like art, has a way of inspiring people, and if they're inspired, they might be more likely to give to the poor, or just generally do great things. What do you think about it?
Yeah, so the thing I wrote down was the Catholic Church is one of the largest charitable organizations on the planet. They'll show up places that most others won't. And so, in this respect, I understand why they build churches and monuments and all this art and beauty and culture is that it helps drive people towards listening more to some of the values that the Catholic Church talks about. Does the Catholic Church have a long, sordid history of violence and oppression and conquest and manipulation of governments and the Inquisition? Sure. Yes, it does.
They sure do.
Has it evolved over time? Absolutely. And
Most def.
the evolution it's taken now is much more a philosophical bent, that it's less world conquest and control and more let's be nicer to everybody and think more about the humanity in things, which I don't really have a choice. I was baptized Catholic, so I'm Catholic, whether I want to be or not. I'm on a list. The point is that I've actually seen the Sagrada Familia Church in person. I haven't been inside, but I saw it from outside when I visited Barcelona. And it's very difficult to describe just how big it is. It's like a skyscraper almost. It looms over everything. And in that sense, I think it is a really phenomenal work of art. The fact that it's taken so long to build is testament to the reality that it is just incredible. And that's something I think we're losing as a society as wealth keeps getting siphoned more and more into the hands of fewer and fewer people. We're only allowed to see what they want us to see in terms of what they think is worthy of being art. And the church, at least in some ways, functions as a way around that it pools resources and money from people who otherwise might not be able to have any kind of art of that nature or grandeur. And so in that respect, I do appreciate the value of art like that it contributes to culture and society without being tied to the limited purview of the existing wealthy. Because if you look at history, a lot of the art and monuments are tied to private investment in philanthropy, and this is a little bit different. And so The other thing about the Catholic Church is while people can only operate within their limited lifespan, the Catholic Church can think in terms of centuries, if not millennia. That it
Wow.
has the ability. That's the point of this work, that it started many years ago and it's been ongoing for so long because the plans were to build it for a very long time. And the church is the thing that can maintain that because the church can last beyond our fragile, limited human lifespan.
Yeah, great. Personally, yeah, I hope they build more cathedrals. There's a limit, but people have good values in that sense of let's give to the poor and stuff, and I trust them to make the right call on that. Mondays with Mike.